How did China escape colonialism? The Chinese civilization is a very ancient one, and shares a lot of similarities with its neighbor, India. But, unlike India, which came under the British colonial rule, China was never directly ruled, as a whole nation, by any colonial power. People have different theories about how China escaped colonial rule. And many of them jump into conclusions, to suit their prejudiced belief. Some of the explanations we hear are: 1. China was ruled by a single imperial power that couldn't be defeated in a war. 2. China had a homogeneous race, with 90% of their population being Han Chinese, unlike India, which had a diverse set of beliefs and traditions. A section of India had also been forcibly converted by the Muslim invaders, for around 5 centuries, prior to the British arrival. So, India could be colonized through a divide and rule policy, unlike China. 3. China had a strong fighting force, and was willing to face any challenge from the external entities. 4. And last, a bizarre one, believed by some cinephiles, is that the Chinese race is just a superior race. If you want to know which one of the above theory is true, the answer is, none of the above. In fact, China was very much in the process of being colonized by the European powers and Japan, in the late 19th century. Though colonialism has existed for several centuries, the modern European colonial rule had the highest impact on the world, due to the vast area they colonized using their advanced, destructive weaponry, and exercised their brutality and subjugation, to the maximum efficiency. For colonialism to be sustainable, a large contingent of soldiers, weaponry, and supplies need to travel, to their land of conquest, requiring large ships. Such large, sophisticated ships were built only starting the 15th century, to make long voyages, by the Portuguese and the Spanish. In the 15th and the 16th century, the quest for almost all the European powers was to reach the land of the rich, the land of gold, namely, India. The European tribes had been constantly fighting wars, for the previous centuries, and had developed better and better weaponry, for their own survival. So, when they had formed empires of their own, it was time for them to trade, conquer, and plunder the lands, beyond their own continent. All the European powers were obsessed with India, but the ships they built were not sophisticated enough to travel to India, and even to reach around the Cape of Good Hope, in Africa. Most of their expeditions were unsuccessful, leading to heavy loss of men and ships. When Christopher Columbus suggested that India could be reached by traveling westward, the Spanish and Portuguese rulers jumped on the idea. But, he ended up in the Americas, leading to the Portuguese colonization of Brazil first, followed by the Spanish colonization of many other countries in South and North America. Though Portuguese colonized a small region in India first, it was the British who started their colonization in 1751, and controlled large parts of India, by the middle of the 19th century. The question we had at the beginning was, why did China never get colonized then? The problem starts with its geography, and land topography. If India was hard to reach by land, or by sea, China was 10 times harder for the European imperialists to reach, until their ships became more and more sophisticated to travel even longer distances. You may wonder, what about a land invasion of China, directly from Europe? China was under the Qing dynasty, starting from the early part of the 17th century, and had a vast empire. However, the terrain on the Chinese borders and inward, was so mountainous, stretching several hundred miles, it was impossible to invade mainland China, by land. More than 90% of the Chinese population lived thousands of miles away, from their own borders with Europe, and a land invasion was just out of the question. By the 19th century, being an island nation, the British were the most advanced, among the European powers, in shipbuilding, including warships. By the 1830s, the British had built enough power to travel across the Indian Ocean, into the South China Sea, and reach the eastern coast of China. Also by the 1830s, the British were in control of a large region of India, with the troops under their trading company called the British East India Company. The British Empire was now interested to use their Indian base to travel to the Chinese coast, to plunder China, in the guise of forcing the Chinese to trade. Trade relations between China and Europe had been established a long while ago. It had increased to a much higher level with ships taking in larger volume during the 19th century. However, this trade had a high imbalance, especially between Britain and China. While Britain in particular, and Europe in general, had a high demand for the Chinese products like tea, silk, and porcelain, there was nothing that China wanted from Britain. China had a view that they are self-sufficient, and the barbarians, a term they used to refer to the Europeans, had nothing of value to them. The trade imbalance caused Europe to shell out large amount of silver coins, until they feared they'll run out of silver. So, Britain came up with a great idea of forcing opium to be sold to China, in exchange for the Chinese products. Britain wanted more and more Chinese to become opium addicts, and be forced to purchase it from them. Britain then pushed the Indian farmers to grow opium, at the cost of more useful crops, like rice and wheat, creating food shortage in India. But, for Britain, their goal of subjugating China was very important, and the suffering of the Chinese opium addicts, or the Indian farmers and people, mattered the least. However, China refused to let opium imported into its land, as large British shipments, as it was making many healthy young Chinese waste away their life, as addicts. Britain was furious, leading to a series of conflicts, between 1839 to 1842, known as the First Opium War. The Qing dynasty of China had a massive army, compared to the British army of less than 20,000, which invaded China. But, the British had a superior navy, and modernized weaponry in their armed forces. In the end, Britain humiliated China, and forced them to accept opium into their land, with no restrictions. Several treaties were signed between Britain and China, following the Chinese defeat, which were clearly one-sided and humbling to China. China was now considered as a weak force, an easy prey to be devoured by the European imperialists. The Europeans showed higher and higher degree of control on China, with forcible trade, and pushing their religion of Christianity, through pervasive missionary activities. China had resisted such practices again, leading to the Second Opium War between 1856 to 1860, and later the Boxer Rebellion, starting 1899. China suffered absolute devastation in their resistance, leading to the signing of subsequent treaties, allowing Europeans to rule over parts of China. During this period, China appeared like a cardboard box, easy to fold, and was in a position to be easily colonized. The Chinese resistance was mute and irrelevant. Even the small country of neighboring Japan joined the European powers, and waged the First Sino-Japanese War against China, in 1894 to 1895, and defeated China comprehensively. China was forced to face further humiliation to the Japanese as well. The period starting with the First Opium War is referred to as the Century of Humiliation, by the Chinese, as they suffered more and more defeats in the hands of the European powers, like Britain, Germany, Italy, France, Russia, Austria, apart from the United States, and Japan. During the later part of 19th century, the European powers and Japan had finally decided to colonize the entire of China, and the only thing left was to decide which power ruled which part of China. This strategy of the European powers joining together, and coming to an agreement of dividing their spoils, was followed successfully, with the entire African continent earlier. Just like a group of pirates would share their bounty, to avoid fighting amongst themselves, the European powers used this strategy for effective control of large land mass, by agreeing to share the new colonies. China was close to becoming under multiple colonial powers, but they didn't. The question is why? After all, China was weak and humiliated. There was nothing they could do, except watch their invaders carve up their land. The answer lies in the new emerging power of the United States of America. Though America had joined the Europeans in forcing China to trade, which helped the US economy, America didn't want China to be colonized. In fact, one of the most important reasons why China was not colonized by the end of the 19th century, was the resistance shown by the American administration, especially, the US Secretary of State, John Hay. John Hay laid out a policy known as open door policy, in 1899, when the US realized that the Chinese imperial rule would collapse any time, under the combined weight of their own weaknesses, internal corruption, power struggle, division of authority, and the pressure by the European imperialists. Though the open door policy was a trade policy, insistent on free trade between the European powers and others, it had a larger message of not colonizing China. Knowing that the European powers were inching towards carving up China, to colonize, John Hay issued a second, more important series of open door notes, in 1900. America was still not in a position to enforce their policy though. Colonization was very much in the plans of the European powers and Japan. However, luck would favor China. The internal squabbles between the powers on deciding which part of China belongs to whom, led to a war between Russia and Japan, fought between 1904 to 1905. Though Japan crushed Russia in the war, America intervened to broker a peace deal in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the issue of Chinese colonization became contentious, and had to be pushed to the back burner then. The fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, the civil war in China following that, with several warlords controlling different parts of China, and the First World War of 1914 to 1919, led to further complications in colonizing China, and by the time the Second World War ended, in 1945, the idea of colonization was no more appealing, nor sustainable. Most of Europe was in shambles, and they had no capacity to control far-off lands. India became independent, in 1947, and China became united under a single communist rule, in 1949. That's the story of how China escaped colonialism. Thanks for watching.